Fantastic. Thank you, Vanessa, and a great subject we're about to tackle, one I'm always loath to do so alone. Thankfully, I have Jeff with me, and as an indicator of the stars we have on our team, we're very glad that Jeff has joined us recently. So Jeff, you and I talk about this the whole time. AI is a very important sector for Founders Factory. We've actually built one of the sectors we operate in is AI and big data. We think there are limitless possibilities. But there is also a lot of general confusion, and we find it amongst investor groups. We find it amongst large corporates looking to deploy new technologies. I think it's fair to say we even find it amongst startup founders ourselves. So first question is a really simple one. If we're going to look for a definition of AI, what should we use, Jeff?
I guess you know, if you're looking at the pitch decks of hot startups these days, you'll just see AI being in there as being the magical thing that does everything. But you know, at the Founders Factory, we just like to bring it down to basics. So maybe if you think of it as software that attempts to replicate the human brain's ability to learn from data and to learn to do actions or tasks that we're trying to get it to do. So the other way to think about it, instead of getting a team of coders to go and create an algorithm for you to do something clever, you just give it examples of inputs and outputs, and then you ask the machine to learn to do that task for you at scale.
I think that's a good, helpful starting point for everybody. You hear lots of different descriptions. Somebody said to me the other day that really AI is just about trying to make computers operate as they do in films. I thought that was actually quite an interesting way to think about it too. I think one question for you though is that when you go over to the Valley at the moment, you kind of hear a lot of people making this distinction between general AI and narrow AI. And I think what they're trying to get at there is the difference between research teams who are trying to genuinely replicate the human brain and apply that piece of software to any particular problem across any given industry sector. And then you look at these narrow AI use cases where perhaps I sometimes feel that there are more opportunities for startups to target one very specialized sector where there may be very deep proprietary data sets and specialized rules that need to be contained within that sector to give life to useful information. Do you think this split between general AI and narrow AI is helpful? I know sometimes you say to me you don't think it is.
So I guess usually general AI is this mythical thing. You know, we've all seen, you know, the Space Odyssey. You know, it's HAL 24K. He's going to, you know, learn to be like us, to talk like us, to do tasks like us. But what you see in reality at the moment are mostly narrow AI who are being applied to very, very well-defined tasks with very narrow scopes. So, for example, sorting your email, filtering your email, even responding to email these days. You know, that's what Google has deployed in Gmail. But there are interesting companies who are trying to bridge the gap between the narrow and the general. So for example, DeepMind is trying to tackle a task or a problem called catastrophic forgetting. So you have a problem where you teach an AI to do one task, which could be playing Pong. You know, they like the Atari games back at DeepMind. So that's what they do the whole day, and they've got like, you know, 1,000 people doing that. Not to belittle what they're doing, but they can achieve superhuman performance at Pong, but then when they try to apply it to another game like Space Invaders, then the neural network forgets and they can't do Pong as well. So there are lots of steps, like fundamental problems in the AI space to kind of get these neural networks to keep learning and not forgetting. And I think there are very encouraging steps along the way, but it's still a long way.
That's very helpful for everyone to appreciate. I think that's right, and I think that maybe touching on that, Jeff, the one other point is, you know, we all get very excited about AI now, but to some degree, lots of data and some rather complex maths has existed for a very long period of time, and there are lots of different formats of machine learning that one can argue have been around for many years. Why now? Why is everybody excited about now? Is it just as simple as there's a huge amount of data sets that previously weren't available? We've now got the power of cloud compute. We've got advances at the GPU level. What do you think really drives the rationale behind there being a big opportunity right now?
I think it's a combination of all of that. So the huge amounts of data that we have these days, I mean, it's like millions of images, tweets, you know, user-generated content being generated every day. It certainly helps. You know, there's more data to train these things. But if you look at the big breakthroughs in computer vision recently, for example, I mean, the AI scientists there needed 14 million images that were labeled. So somebody had to go through every single one of these images and tell you there were a dog or a plane or a bicycle in there. And that's a huge amount of effort. So I think it's only now that people have done that, and then we have huge breakthroughs in vision. But there are other areas like language, for example, where we don't have these labeled data sets, and it's much harder to get the AI to understand tweets, to understand our email. And recently there was even Perspective, like a Google tool that was built to detect toxic comments in social media. So that's protecting the people that need protecting. But simple typos just confuses the algorithm, and it doesn't detect toxic comments anymore. So it kind of highlights, AI in some tasks are superhuman these days, so better than human in vision, in a lot of the other categories, but also very brittle. So once you fall outside the parameters on which it's been trained, then it's worse than a baby, essentially.
That's great. And just to throw another question out there, I guess then it's one of the ones, lots of people go around and maybe they've played with a chatbot, maybe they've tried some recommendations on a news publisher's website, and they've kind of looked at it and gone, my God, is there really AI involved in that? It doesn't work at all. It's just completely hopeless. When you and I look at this stuff, we talk a lot around the sectors where there are actual implementations that we know are delivering value right now. If you were going to pick maybe the top 3 sectors, industry sectors right now, where you genuinely feel that an AI approach is delivering tangible value to those industries right now, what would you choose?
I think I would choose health in the first place. There's lots of data out there from both on the consumer side, but also on the drug discovery side, because there are a lot of data about molecules that we have access to these days, and also drug targets that we want to hit. And it's all a case of designing these two and predicting these things. So that's an area where there's lots of training data, and AI is doing really, really well. So it's designing new molecules that people didn't think about, just like in AlphaGo, where you have the AI playing moves in Go that nobody has seen before. And in retrospect, people have found to be really clever and interesting. Other areas could be finance, so where you're looking at huge amounts of data, and it's different in this case. So you're looking for outliers, fraud, strange transactions, and so on. So that's where AI can really come to the fore and look at so much data that none of us could humanly go through. And maybe the last one would be cyber. So again, there's lots of data there. There is a common trend happening, and that's where there's huge data, hopefully labeled. Somebody has gone through all these, and then the AI can really help you.
Cool. I think those are good examples. It's worth remembering. I think a lot of the businesses I end up consulting with, they kind of buy into the promise of AI. Generally speaking, this is a huge statement, but I'll make it anyway, as I think they do tend to find better value very quickly within those B2B use cases. When you try to deploy some of these technologies and put it back into the hands of consumers, that's where we get the nightmares around the chatbot scenarios and people feeling that this is a technology that, frankly, isn't ready for market right yet. It's just we got a lot of investors in the room. Why should people be investing now in AI? I guess is the other thing, and I have a view on this one. I kind of, when I think around where we're trying to place our money as we think as Founders Factory, it does seem to me that this is a wonderful time to be investing in AI or machine learning businesses for one very simple structural reason, and that's that there is huge demand for data science talent. We know this on the open market. Every business struggles to get hold of it right now. And if you're sensible and an investor, one approach to do is to make investments where you think there is incredibly huge potential upside, which I think unquestionably there is in these models, but there is also some incredibly limited downside. And I think one of the things that excites us around investing in these AIs is that the teams involved in these businesses are at this point in time, unquestionably the most acqui-hireable teams. So if somebody's trying something that proves to be too different, the downside protection for those early stage investors seems to be quite significant to me right now. Is it tends to be that these companies don't often need huge funding patterns over time before they get to an acquisition. There's an enormous upside, but there's actually quite a limited downside. It's a bit like playing around with a mobile design agency 5 years ago when nobody understood what mobile design was. And you kind of knew if the business didn't work out, there would be somebody who would just acquire the team. Do you see a lot of that? You're obviously close to a lot of the early stage talent here in the UK.
Yeah, I think we see a lot of that. I think probably the other macro trend that's happening is that Google, DeepMind, Facebook are working on a lot of the deep networks and a lot of the theory and the basic research that needs to happen. And these are billion-dollar programs that if you can just time it just right, you can take, I mean, that's what Andrew Ng, one of the famous professors from Stanford, advises, is just take the the neural network models coming out of these research programs and just apply them. Sometimes it's very hard to go head-to-head with these big guys. So if you're going to try to replicate these research programs, it's probably a bit, bonkers, really. But if you know when these are coming out and you take them out and then you just apply them, then you leverage a lot of that research that's already gone on, and you apply that to your niche little area that Google is not going to come in, and hopefully that's making you lots of money. I think that's the way we think about, promising AI startups.
That's great. And I guess also just linked to this point, and maybe thinking a little bit around all the investors we have in the room today, I'm sure everybody receives 25 business plans a day saying, we're leveraging AI for X. Should we just try and give a little bit of rationale as to how we try and do some due diligence on some of these businesses? Because I think a lot of early stage angel investors who I speak to, they're just too scared to get involved with this sector. They feel they don't have the depth of technical knowledge that's necessary. When a business approaches us as Founders Factory, we still look at the fundamentals behind the business first off. We look at the market opportunity, we look at the competition, we look at the makeup of the team. We have a think and think what's protectable at a technology level. But where do you think are the differences when we're evaluating a business that's looking at AI against a business that may be doing something in, say, consumer e-commerce?
I guess the way I've always looked at it is that the technology gap, the technology plus data gap. So it's knowing what's doable at the moment, what's really sensible, and you can just take off-the-shelf packages and you can just apply it to the domain, and it will work really well. To what's the level that's needed to deliver the value proposition. It's not always easy, so sometimes you need access to experts in the field to be able to get the feel of that. But it's always helped my thinking in terms of really, is the business plan sensible, and is the funding that's required for this business sensible with respect to the ambition or the challenge that they're trying to address, if that helps.
I think that does help a bit, and I think maybe it might help also if we talk a little bit around what we see as the makeup of some of these teams. We see lots of different highly technical 12 PhDs all together working on some breakthrough variant around neural networks for one specific sector. With my hat on, that worries me. I like to see people who still do understand users. I like to see people who understand product design. I want to see a commercial brain in that business too. But do you think there needs to be an overweighting on those technical skill sets within these businesses to really be able to scale?
I think so. If you look at successful cases, so Magic Pony, that's recently been in the news, they've taken models that were very common in academia. So it's stuff that people could really do easily, super resolution in this instance, and they've applied that to a pain point, which is going from low resolution video to very high definition. So I guess this is something that would not excite a team of 12 PhD AI scientists. They would like to go on to meatier and more challenging or interesting topics. But here, that's where a good business hat on and good product design as well can help guide that AI talent into cases where there are pain points, and it will bring you lots of revenue and interest.
Cool. And the other thing is, here we sit in London. We founded Founders Factory in London for a reason. Ours was because there were a lot of corporate HQs here. We thought unbelievable talent, and we still think London's a great place to base a business, despite what's happened over recent months. The government makes a big fanfare, however, around our ability at this machine learning and AI level. This could be the big next thing we can export to the world as the UK. And I think there is an interesting question in that as to whether or not, Jeff, you believe that's really the case. Do you think that the universities here in the UK are producing such outrageously good talent that it actually outweighs the likes of the universities in Paris, or looking at what goes on in Lausanne, or what goes on, as we know well, on the ground in China? We have a big Chinese investor backing us for our AI sector. Is it a myth that there was the best talent here in the UK? And then the follow-up question to that is, does it matter?
I guess you're probably asking the wrong person. I'm a bit biased, having spent 12 years down the road here in Kensington, having gone through, the British education system. But I think probably trying to be a bit more objective, if you look at the number of UK universities doing world-class research, I think it's probably up there. They're probably, we can pick a few like Lausanne in Switzerland and the École in Paris. But there are more UK world-class teams doing that research here. And I guess something that kind of accelerated all of this is DeepMind happened. So all of a sudden, we've got academics being pulled in from the States, from Canada, coming to London. And I like to think of it as, why is the Valley so successful? It's that pure concentration of talent, in a very small, piece of land. And we're having the same thing happening here in London, which I think is really amazing. And I think there's lots more that's going to happen in that space.
So you think those early successes have built network effects, I guess, around our talent here in the UK? I think that's a sensible way to think around the problem, and I think that's an interesting way to view it. Just give forward to another question we actually get asked a lot, which is, how defensible do we think businesses are that are largely leveraging off-the-shelf machine learning techniques? Because there is inevitably a big divide amongst capacity for young startups to deliver breakthrough tech on day one. Most people tend to get started with off-the-shelf software. We know that from every technology sector we look at. But does that worry you around the defensibility of those businesses over the long term?
I think if you follow the lean principle, it's all about testing business pain points first. It probably makes sense to start with off-the-shelf packages. You don't want to build or to go into a 2-year research program just to find out that pain point never really existed in the first place. And then you'll have a team of PhDs scratching their heads, asking what they should do next. But I think data plays a big role there. So if you can acquire really proprietary data where you can train your AI and nobody else has that kind of data. You have to be a bit more tactical there because Google has loads of data about our behavior, where we're browsing, clicking on the internet, what we're replying to in our emails. But there are loads of apps out there with millions of users generating loads of really unique data. If you look at Fitwel, a company that you'll see a bit later on, they've got 1 million users being sent motivational messages that and then who actually responding to these messages, in what conditions, at what time. So this is like a treasure trove of data that can give you insight, and then you train an AI on that to tell you what's best to tell something to somebody to get them to take action. We think that's really cool. So I think it's having that kind of data and building models out of that, and then keep evolving these models. Because along the way, you've taken off-the-shelf packages, but the team would have made tweaks that would increase the accuracy. So sometimes they can be really tiny tweaks. You change the parameters of the network or change something in there, but then it gives you huge increases in accuracy. And I think that shouldn't be underestimated as well. So you can get defensibility by just the amount of time that you've spent customizing your models and getting to great user experiences.
Fantastic, that's a great answer. I know we're almost out of time, so I'm going to throw one last one at you, because I think maybe people here will be curious. You've done an amazing selection of projects over the last 10 years, Jeff, but if you were running out, and I'm not going to let you do this, I stress, but if you were going to run out and do your own startup now, what sector would you try and chase down, and where do you think the big next change in this AI technology is going to come from?
I'm a great believer in hyper-personalization, so just a quick question to the audience. Who has seen the movie Her? Or know what it's about? So it's an AI that gets to know the user so well that actually the protagonist, the actor, falls in love with the AI. But actually there's another concept in Japanese called omotenashi, which is your host knows you so well that they would serve you before you even have to ask for something. So I think if we are able to get AI to be even like a fraction of that, I think we can have a step change in the, our user experience with all this technology, and I think that can unlock so many things. It is broad. I don't know which particular application that will be best, will give the best returns, but I'm very passionate about this.
And what do you think the technological advances that enables that? There's lots of talk around externalizing memory and neural networks, about training with lower levels of data sets. Where do you think the next breakthrough might be that helps us get some way towards that vision being a reality?
I think that's a good point, because neural networks have been trained on large amounts of data, and it's a bit like getting them to address the whole of the population, but how do we get them to know you and your preferences? So memory is a big advance that DeepMind has been developing. So not learning in general, but learning actual examples, being able to store these and retrieve them when needed. I think that's going to be a big part in that. So, God knows what the DeepMind guys will do to AI models, the next few years. But I think maybe as a parting thing is this point I've raised before. It's like knowing when these models are coming out and then capitalizing on those in a startup setting would be maybe a good idea.
Sounds sensible to me, and I shall certainly set you that task over the next few years. Fantastic, Jeff. Thank you so much for your insight.